Good afternoon. The National Assembly of Wales is now in session, and the first item this afternoon are questions to the First Minister. And question 1 is Simon Thomas.
Clywed, a wnaeth y Prif Weinidog ddatganiad am argymhellion adroddiad y Comisiwn Smith a goblygiadau I Gymru.
Wel, mae'n cynnig beth bynnag sy'n cael ei gynnig i'r Alban I Gymru hefyd, dyle fod ddim gwaniaeth rhwng y ddau.
Diolch, Prif Weinidog. Byddwch chi wedi gweld falle bod eich Flaenydd Fodry Morgan wedi dweud tu pythefnos yn ôl yn y Western Mail. If Wales had Scottish levels of funding, I have no doubts that Welsh Labour would be happy to kickstart the referendum process and then campaign for yes vote on income tax devolution. Mae Plaid Cymru wrth gwrs wedi argyfyru bod cyllido cyfatar i'r Alban yn rhywbeth yn debyg I 1.2 biliwn. Beth yw asesiad chi o'r cyllido cyfatar yna, a pryd felly I chi yn meddwl byddwn ni'n ymgyrchu dros trethi incwm yma yng Nghymru? Wel,
barn ni yw beth wedodd Comisiwn Holtum, na beth oedd barn eich blaid chi ar un adeg, ond ta beth yw'r ffigur, beth sy'n bwysig yw bod hwnna'n cael I ddelio gyda, cyn bod yn unrhyw sôn am treth incwm. Na, mae pethau ni wedi gyfan gwbl as wrth diwetha, ynglyn â beth sy'n cael ei gynnig i'r Alban. Mae'n rhaid i ni felly I fodelu beth sy'n cael ei gynnig i'r Alban yma yng Nghymru, ond wrth gwrs ni dal I fod yn yr un sefyllfa lle dyw Barnet ddim yn rhoi unrhyw ffefr I Gymru.
Julie Morgan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the First Minister agree that following the publication of the Smith Commission, it's even more urgent that we have a constitutional convention because we may end up with part of the UK federal and part unitary, and that this is unsustainable in the long term? And does he agree that we should move towards a written constitution preceded by a constitutional convention and a referendum?
I certainly believe in a constitutional convention. I wouldn't want the convention to look at powers. I think powers must run parallel to a convention process, mainly because I wouldn't want the issue of powers to be wrapped up in a convention process that might take many years, thus depriving the people of Wales of the powers that they need. What the convention needs to look at is the structure of the UK and how the four nations relate to each other. I think that's perfectly practical, and it may well lead to, at least in part, a written constitution, because what we need is certainty in terms of who can do what. It's quite clear that the constitution we've had isn't fit for purpose for this coming century, and we need to get it right for all the people who live in the UK.
Paul Davis.
Diolch, Llywyd. Prif Weinidog, chi wedi gwneud yn glir unwaith eto heddi eich bod chi eisiau gweld pwerau sy'n cael ei gynnig i'r Alban yn cael ei gynnig I Gymru, ond ni ddim yn clywed wrthoch chi pa bwerau byddech chi yn ei derbyn. Gallwch chi ddweud wrthon ni felly pa bwerau sydd yn adroddiad Comisiwn Smith byddech chi ddim yn derbyn I Gymru?
Byddwn ni'n derbyn popeth, ond wrth gwrs, Barnet. Beth sy'n Comisiwn Smith, mae Comisiwn Smith yn gweud dyle Barnet I aros. Bydd ddim derbyn o gwbl ynglyn â sefyllfa cyllido Cymru. Na, fi'n agored i'r syniad dyle Cymru gael ei gyllido mewn ffordd Barnet Plus, ond cyn bod hwnna'n cael ei ddatrys, bydde fe'n rhywbeth, bydde fe'n yn gall ni felly I gymryd pwerau dros treth incwm. Pwerau eang wrth gwrs sydd o'r Comisiwn Smith, rhywbeth sydd yn hollol yn fwy eang na beth ni wedi cael o'r blaen, so felly bydde rhaid ystyried beth bydd hwnna'n meddwl I bobl Cymru. Ond ynglyn enghraifft a treth ar hedfan, treth awyr, bydde fe'n rhywbeth hollol annibyniol sy'r Alban yn cael hwnna. Cymru ddim. Does dim reswm dan hael pam dylwn ei ddigwydd.
Question 2, Jocelyn Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Will the First Minister make a statement on links between Wales and China?
We do have active links between Wales and China across a broad range of areas, including business, tourism, education and culture.
Thank you, First Minister. Will you join me in condemning the practice of forced organ harvesting from prisoners in China? And what action can your government take to support the international efforts to stop this appalling practice?
Well, could I join the member in expressing my great concern at this practice? We believe as a government, of course, that any trade in organs or forced organ donation is abhorrent and must end. And it is in any case illegal in the UK to trade in organs. I understand that EU directives require that all organs should be fully traceable, and so there should be no question of such organs arriving in Europe. And of course, we're aware of the campaign run by Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting, and it's right, of course, that this issue should be raised in this chamber quite properly, and of course we would join the UK government in expressing our abhorrence at this practice.
William Graham.
May I join with the First Minister and the previous speaker in condemning that abhorrent practice? Very pleased to note last month, as part of Export Week, that 11 Welsh took part in an international food and drink trade events with China. And what is the First Minister doing to further promote those links?
China is very, very important to us as a food market. For example, it's a market where we have the ability to supply many products into. In terms of the recent trade mission, I can say that as part of that, a food and drink showcase was held in Shanghai last month. There were inquiries with regard for beer, cheese, preserves, and indeed whisky, amongst others. So there's clearly a demand for Welsh produce in China.
Roger Glyn Thomas.
Prif Weinidog, dwi'n croesawu'n fawr iawn eich datganiad chi mewn ymateb I gwestiwn gan Jocelyn Davies. Fe gafon ni gyfarfod nes I noddi yma yn y cynulliad y wythnos diwetha gan y meddygon a'r gwleidyddion sy'n gwrthwynebu y modd yma organau yn cael eu cymeryd oddi wrth garcharorion yn China. A wnewch chi'n siŵr nag oes na unrhyw gysylltiad rhwng ysbytau yng Nghymru a'r arfer yma ac hefyd unrhyw ganolfannau megis y canolfannau Confucius sy'n bodoli mewn rhai prifysgolion yng Nghymru a'r arfer yma.
Wel, fe wedi sy'n yr ateb blaenorol, mae yna system Ewropeaidd sy'n delio hwn, ac wrth gwrs mae rhaid i sicrhau bod dim organau yn dod yn y modd hyn mewn I Ewrop a felly I Gymru. A mae systemau sydd yn lle dros Ewrop yn gyfan gwbl, dileu systemau hynny I osgoi hwn I ddigwydd yng Nghymru a gweddill Ewrop.
We now move to questions from the party leaders, and first this afternoon, the Leader of Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, I note that you've repeatedly said that powers offered to Scotland in the light of the Smith Commission should be offered to Wales. Now, there's a big difference between being offered powers and then saying that you want powers. Now, I heard what you said earlier in relation to the Barnett formula. I wonder if you could be clear with us here this afternoon and with the people of Wales. Do you want the Smith and Silk Commission recommendations implemented in full in relation to Wales or not?
Yes, with one small exception, that is, I would not want to see us take powers over income tax unless the issue of our funding is addressed.
First Minister, you appear to be more concerned with caveats than with responsibility. You either want parity with Scotland or you don't. You didn't want income tax sharing powers unless there was fair funding. You didn't want income tax sharing powers where there was a lockstep. Now you're asking to be offered powers, but you won't say if you actually want them or if you'll take them. How much responsibility do you take for Wales having third-rate devolution?
Well, I'm slightly speechless because I did give a very clear answer, I thought. And that is, we would like to have all the powers in Part 2 of Silk and what is in the Smith Commission, except we need to ensure that Wales is fully funded. Scotland is in that position. The reality is we could not accept the Smith Commission in terms of as it would apply to Wales because the Smith Commission enshrines Barnett. And we know that Barnett does not work in Wales's interest and there needs to be there needs to be a way of addressing that underfunding. So if that underfunding is addressed, I would then anticipate that we look at the modelling on how income tax would work for Wales. Because remember, this is a new proposal. This is not what we saw before. This is a wholly new proposal. Not entirely with logic, I have to say, because why would personal allowances not be devolved and yet all of income tax be devolved? I can say that having met with my colleague, the First Minister of Scotland last week, that I said to her that I was supportive of Scotland getting the powers suggested in the Smith Commission, and she in turn is supportive of powers being transferred to Wales. And I look forward to working. There's some things we don't agree on independence being one example, but we will be supportive of each other, I'm sure, in terms of making sure that devolution rolls out further.
Isn't the truth of the matter, First Minister, that you can't even agree in your own party about what you want for Wales? Now, Plaid Cymru is clear. We want parity with Scotland. We want parity of powers and we want parity of funding. Now, we are not asking for parity to be offered, we are demanding parity. Now, Scotland is getting new powers
Order. I want to hear what
it's
the leader's saying.
maintaining its funding. Northern Ireland is getting more powers. The English regions look set to get more powers too, and you are here making excuses and caveats. First Minister, will you take responsibility, and when will you get behind Plaid Cymru's demands for parity with Scotland?
I do wonder sometimes whether I should bother answering the questions, to be honest, given that twice I've given as clear an answer as I possibly could. I mean, she talks about parity with Scotland. Parity with Scotland means accepting Barnett. So, no, I don't want parity with Scotland in that regard. Of course not. And she seems to suggest that somehow fair funding for Wales is a sideshow, something we should try to ignore. Well, it isn't a sideshow. It's crucially important. Even in Scotland, with the powers that the Smith Commission propose, by Nicola Sturgeon's own estimate, 70% of the funding will still come from sources that aren't controlled in Scotland. Now, on that basis, it makes perfect sense to sort out the basis of funding first to get that right, rather than lock in that underfunding through taking income-based powers without thinking. I am all in favour of leading the people of Wales forward when it comes to devolution. I cannot agree with leading the people of Wales off the edge of a cliff without thinking. And the difference between her and myself is this. I want to see Part 2 of Silk implemented. The Smith Commission proposals should be offered to Wales. What I'm not prepared to do is to take new powers blindly without thinking about the financial consequences for the people that I represent. And that is, I think, the sensible way of approaching this issue.
We now move to questions from the Leader of the Opposition, Andrew Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, tomorrow we have the autumn statement, and by all accounts, from reports that are kicking around in the media at the moment, there will be a significant consequential coming the Welsh Government's way. What I would ask of the First Minister, if those reports are to be believed, and it is confirmed in the statement tomorrow, will you use an element of that funding to deliver a new cancer treatments fund here in Wales?
I don't use a cancer drugs fund or a cancer treatments fund. The two are different, of course, but we already spend far more per head on cancer treatment in Wales than in England. We already do better in terms of waiting times for cancer treatment here in Wales. We don't know yet what the consequential will be, because normally, when we are told that this is money that comes from departmental underspends, there is no consequential. So it's not clear at the moment what the consequential will be, whether there will be a consequential or whether there will be a consequential for health, but parts of it will be recouped by consequentials going down in other areas. We don't know yet. But when we get that information, I've seen it tweeted, I've seen it in the papers, we've not had it officially from UK government yet. When we have that money, we will, of course, consider the best way of using it. And all members will be aware, of course, that there continue to be pressures, as there are across the whole of the UK when it comes to health. And no doubt we will consider how that money is best used for the benefit of the people of Wales.
I worded the question very carefully, First Minister, because invariably after autumn statements there are some form of consequentials. The reporting seems to indicate a figure of between 70 to 80 million pounds. I appreciate none of us are aware of the exact figure because the statement will be delivered tomorrow. But last week, Byron Davis, my colleague, highlighted the case of Elizabeth Richards, for example. I could highlight any number of constituents, the length and breadth of Wales, indeed in your own local papers, that come forward time and time again and are unable, regrettably, to access the new treatments that are available for cancer patients. And in particular, some of those patients are actually selling up and moving to the other side of Offa's. That is a fact, and that cannot be denied. In the case of Elizabeth Richards, her family have spent £25,000 on Avastin because obviously she has been declined that on the Welsh NHS. And only last Tuesday, her third application for exceptionality was declined again. Why is Elizabeth Richards wrong and you are right to deny her and many hundreds of other patients across Wales the ability to access these treatments?
These issues are always difficult. And it's always difficult when individuals who are in a difficult position with cancer, when they are affected. I think it's worth saying that. But we have to understand that drugs like Avastin are not automatically available in England. They still have to be applied for. And the UK government now plans to introduce an element of cost efficiency into the Cancer Drugs Fund. If that happens, it's no different from the NICE process. And one of the drugs that has been mentioned specifically is Avastin, and the fact it would then be removed as a drug that will be available for metastatic breast cancer. Now, there's no point having a cancer drugs fund in those circumstances, and so the situation in England will decline inevitably as a result of it. I come back to this point. Cancer drugs are rolled out more quickly in Wales once they are approved by NICE, and we have a system of doing that. It's also the case that cancer treatment is available more quickly in Wales, and we spend more on cancer treatment in Wales. I think those things are certainly worth emphasising. We take the view that it's important to spend money particularly on treatments that work. I mean, one of the difficulties with the Cancer Drugs Fund is that it has sent the price of cancer drugs upwards. What normally happens in the NICE process is that drugs are examined. If they are deemed not to be cost effective, quite often a drug company will come back with a lower price. They don't have to do that now with cancer drugs, and so the price goes up for everybody. Now, I know it's difficult for individuals, and without going into their personal circumstances, I'm not in a position to judge as a medic whether somebody should have a particular drug or not. But it certainly isn't the case that somehow people in Wales are disadvantaged when it comes to cancer treatment overall than people in England.
Mr. Minister, I would disagree with you on that point. Obviously, over 55,000 people have benefited from the Cancer Drugs Fund in England, and I can appreciate the well-argued points that you've just put to me, and there is no easy solution to this, and that's why we've tried to approach it in a constructive way. But time and time again in our postbags, and Nick Ramsey, for example, only two to 3 weeks ago, received a petition here in the Assembly from 100,000 signatories to a call for the Welsh Government to instigate a cancer treatments fund here in Wales. There is the ability, if this consequential does come through to you tomorrow, for the government to consider the establishment of such a fund. Am I right in deducing from the answers you have given me here today that that clearly is off the table in respect of the Welsh Government, and you will not be using any of that additional money, if it was to become available to you, to provide such funding within the Welsh NHS for cancer patients? Well,
No, because first of all, we don't know if there will be a consequential or not. Secondly, we don't know what the consequential might be if there is a consequential. And thirdly, we've not taken a decision yet as to how that money is to be used. We will use the money for the benefit of the people of Wales in the most effective way possible, and we will consider how to do that when and if we know that there is a consequential.
We now move to Leader of the Welsh Liberal Democrats, Kirsty Williams.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, the elderly and vulnerable citizens of Powys have endured months of turmoil since the Council outsourced its domiciliary care services. After many months of reassurances from the Council that things were getting better, it's simply not the case. Only last week I was contacted by the mother of a 98-year-old lady who had been left at home 2 mornings running when their carers did not arrive to assist her. I have received a whistleblowing email from an ex-employee of one of these companies that talked about significant failings in care standards. And 2 of the subcontractors have handed back their clients to the main contractor because they have not had their bills been paid. I have, of course, reported all of this to CSIW, but will you investigate the situation regarding domiciliary care for the elderly and the vulnerable in Powys?
The member will appreciate, of course, these are matters entirely for Powys County Council. She has reported the matter. I would advise her to do that. She's done it anyway. I will write, of course, to her with to respond to the concerns that she has raised, even though, of course, primarily they are matters for the County Council.
Of course, Powys County Council has responsibility for ensuring the elderly and the vulnerable are looked after, but I would only bring this to your attention if I was not convinced that there was capacity within the organisation to deal appropriately with these problems. The issue isn't just affecting those in receipt of care packages. The situation has got so bad, I am now being contacted by GPs and consultants raising concerns that their patients cannot get domiciliary care packages because there is no capacity in the system for them to be provided. I would urge you to do more than just write, First Minister, but to satisfy yourself that the elderly and vulnerable in Powys will be safeguarded over this winter.
Well, first of all, of course, we have to investigate the situation in Powys. Secondly, the member has referred to a situation where there is an element of pushback into the NHS, which clearly is, at least indirectly, a matter for the Welsh Government. when I say I write to her, what I want to do first of all is to see what the situation is on the ground, what the effect is, particularly with primary care services, and then, of course, to write comprehensively back to her.
Thank you, First Minister, for that. Issues of domiciliary care, I know, are not just a matter of concern for those of us that represent Powys. Talking to other colleagues, I know that there are problems in other parts of the country. We know that one of the major issues facing the NHS in Wales this winter is the number of emergency admissions and unscheduled care. And one way to tackle that is to ensure that we have sustainable, robust and quality domiciliary care services in our communities. What is your government doing as we go into the winter months to ensure that those services are available the length and breadth of Wales?
Firstly, of course, there are plans for the winter that are put in place on a regular basis by the local health boards. Secondly, it is a matter for local authorities as the providers of social care to ensure that that care is at a satisfactory level. And of course, it is for the inspectorate to satisfy themselves that that is the case. Where issues are flagged up and the inspectorate finds failings, then of course we would expect the local authorities to take remedial action, and we of course as a government would seek to ensure that that happens.
We now go back to questions on the paper, and question 3 is David Rees.
Will the First Minister make a statement on inward investment in Wales?
Yes, with 1,100 foreign-owned companies in Wales employing over 150,000 people, I'm committed to ensuring that foreign companies continue to view Wales as an excellent place to invest.
Well, thank you for that answer, First Minister, and I agree with you that it's important we get the continuation of jobs, not just new jobs, but continuation of jobs here in Wales. And to that extent, obviously, in your visit recently to India, did you meet with senior executives from Tata Steel to look at what their investment perspectives are for the steel strip projects in Wales, particularly in Port Talbot plant? Because I would like to be able to give reassurances and positive messages back to my constituents over the future of that plant.
Yes, I did meet with Tata Steel. What impressed me was their commitment to Wales and to Port Talbot. We are fortunate in that Tata see themselves as a company that needs to invest in order to become more profitable rather than to cut back, and that is to our advantage. They said to me that they wanted to continue to invest in Wales. Two matters of concern. Firstly, of course, the difficulty still with the price of steel. That is something that we all have to be aware of. And secondly, energy costs in the UK. Again, they're saying to me that it is difficult. They're very happy with the support they get from government, very happy with the workforce in Port Talbot and in their other plants in Wales, but they continue to wrestle with the fact that energy costs are so high. They are looking now at putting investment in to look at alternative power sources, but unfortunately it is an issue that comes up on a regular basis in discussions with me and with the Minister.
Andrew Archie-Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, in respect of inward investment, there has been some good news of late after the disastrous decline in inward investment over many years here in Wales. Under the old WDA, obviously we used to attract 15% of inward investment into the United Kingdom. I think we're on about 4.5–5% now we are. What potential do you think Wales has between those two figures of attracting a greater amount of inward investment? Or do you see 4.5–5% as being the new norm for attracting inward investment into Wales?
Well, first of all, the figure that he refers to was an exceptional figure in the early 1990s. After that, it declined. WDA declined almost year on year going into the last decade. And there were reasons for that. First of all, of course, the competition was much hotter. In the early 1990s, the Iron Curtain had just come down. We didn't see the competition from the Far East, for example, that we do now, and we didn't get the high levels of investment. LG was probably the last one for many, many years. Also, we have to remember that a lot of the investment that came in the late 80s and early 90s came into Wales because wage rates were lower than anywhere else, and they left and went elsewhere when they could. The levels we're getting now are increasing, the best levels we've had for 30 years. Importantly, I believe the investment's sustainable. We're now getting investors who come to Wales, not on the basis that we're cheaper than anywhere else, but on the basis that we have the skills, on the basis that we have the environment that they can prosper in, on the basis that they can get government support in a way that wasn't the case before. So I'm confident that we will see investment continue to increase in Wales. We've seen some very good announcements in the course of the last month, and there will be more to come.
Elena Parrott.
Diolch. Tomorrow we debate the Enterprise and Business Committee's report into inward investment, and one of the recommendations there was that the Welsh Government should publish KPIs for trade missions with targets for the number of businesses and the number of orders that are received as a direct result of that. How do you feel your government can justify trade missions to a sceptical public if you do not publish rigorous data to demonstrate the value of them?
We should have trade missions. I mean, that's the implication of a comment is we shouldn't have trade missions. The difficulty is this. You take a trade mission to a country, you don't get orders immediately. Quite often, businesses will use that as an opportunity to make connections, and then they will get orders subsequently down the line. It's been my experience on trade missions, that is the case. You don't go so and then suddenly get contracts. Quite often, it's a way of opening doors for businesses who get contracts down the line. In terms of how you measure that, we'll look at the inward investment figures for the past 30 years. It would be, I'll use this word diplomatically, unwise to suggest that somehow we shouldn't have trade missions, whereas every other country in the world does.
John Griffiths.
Yes, would you agree with me, First Minister, that following the recent investment summit in Newport, Newport is ideally placed for inward investment with its transport and communication links, and particularly as part of the Cardiff City capital region, but also as part of the wider region, including Bristol?
Could I say I admire the bravery of the member in describing Newport as part of the Cardiff City capital region, but I understand his point. I think Newport is well placed to attract investment. It has done already. We saw, of course, the announcement with SBTS in the last week, an important investment into the city. And Newport has been in the eyes of the world with the NATO summit and now, of course, with the investment.
Question 4, Darren Miller.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. What action is the Welsh Government taking to secure rail investment in North Wales, please?
Well, we recognise the importance of rail investment in the north, of course, and the North Wales Transport Task Force will be providing recommendations for further improvements.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. You'll know how welcome it was that the electrification of the South Wales line has been funded by the UK government. But of course, North Wales also is in need of investment, and certainly electrification is one of those things on the wish list for North Wales Assembly members. You'll be aware that the UK Department for Transport has established a task force on electrification in the northwest of England, and I wonder what work the Welsh Government's task force might be able to undertake with them jointly in order to strengthen any business case for investment from the UK Government and elsewhere.
Well, I would fully support the member in his view that the main line should be electrified. It's not a matter for the Welsh Government, but nevertheless, I think we're on the same page in that regard. We ourselves have put the investment into the partial redoubling of the Wrexham to Saltney Junction to make sure that the services there become more frequent, and we welcome the fact that the UK Government is looking to improve the Halton Curve, which of course will enable services to run through to Liverpool from Wrexham. Where there are opportunities to work together, we will of course do so for the benefit of people in the northwest of England and the north of Wales.
Lle Griffith.
Diolch Llywydd. Un o'r bygythiadau wrth gwrs y seilwaith reilffordd presennol yn y gogledd yw erydiad o'r môr a hefyd llifogydd arfordirol. Mae Gweinidogion y Llywodraeth yn y gorffennol wedi dweud y bydden nhw'n awyddus i drafod gyda y sector breifat yn ehangach, cwmni yswiriant ac yn y blaen y posibiliadau o ddenu buddsoddiad i fynd i'r afel a rhai o'r problemau yna. Allwch chi felly rhoi diweddariad i ni o bosibl ysgrifenedig ynglyn ag unrhyw drafodaethau sydd wedi digwydd?
Wrth gwrs, na fi'n siŵr bod Gweinidogion yn sgrifennu atoch chi. Ni gyd yn deall wrth gwrs faint mor bwysig yw wrth gofio newid hinsawdd bod ni'n gallu atal. Wel, dwi ddim yn bosib bod trwy atal llifogydd, ond i leihau effeithiau llifogydd yn y pen draw, ac wrth gwrs fi'n siŵr bod y Gweinidogion yn sgwennu atoch chi gyda mwy o fanylion.
Alan Roberts.
Prif Weinidog, mae'r tasglu'r Gweinidog, dwi'n gobeithio mynd i adrodd yn fuan iawn. Mae'r adroddiad, dwi'n meddwl sydd wedi cael ei gomisiynu gan 6 awdurdod y gogledd yn deud bod tua 1.5 biliwn o fydd i economi'r gogledd os di llinell y gogledd yn cael ei ddiweleiddio. Gai ofyn i chi felly, os oes yna angen i cael strwythurau mwy ffurfiol ar draws rhwng Gogledd Cymru a'r Gogledd Orllewin, o achos mae yna benderfyniadau fe'n cael ei cymryd yn y Gogledd Orllewin sydd yn dylanwadu ar materion sydd angen i ni fod yn ymwybodol ohonyn nhw yn y Gogledd.
Wrth gwrs, a fe wedys i yn gynharach, ni'n wastad yn awyddus i weithio gyda llywodraethau yr ochr go o'r ffin. Ni wedi gwneud hwnna wrth gwrs yn hanesyddol trwy cyngrau'r ymyrsu ar dyfrdwy, ac wrth gwrs digon barod i weithio gyda awdurdodau mwyn sicrhau bod gwelliannau yn y rwydwaith trafnidiaeth ar bob ochr, ar y ddau ochr o'r ffin.
Question 5, Jenny Rathbone.
What is the Welsh Government doing to increase the supply of affordable housing?
Yes, our social housing grant programme is investing over £400 million in this term of the government to increase the supply of affordable housing. In terms of what that actually means on the ground, we've delivered 6,890 additional affordable homes against our target of 10,000. That is excellent progress, and we believe we are on course to meet what is an ambitious target.
That is excellent progress, First Minister, but unfortunately there remain very large numbers of people who are trapped in unaffordable private rented housing. Some of them are simply unable to work because they cannot earn enough to cover the private rented. And we've also seen globally the rise of claims for housing benefit from people in work, which tells us that really there is not nearly enough of affordable housing. What exploration has the government done of getting a loan from the European Investment Bank, which is less than 3%, which could provide the possibility of sub-market affordable housing, which obviously has to be, the money has to be returned within 3 years, but it is another way in which we could provide more housing for people like my constituents who are faced with 12,000 people on the housing waiting list.
Well, European Investment Bank funding for affordable housing usually comes through the Housing Finance Corporation. That's the national organisation set up specifically to aggregate and service the housing association's long-term debt requirements. I know a number of housing associations in Wales have taken advantage of the long-term finance through the THFC, and the THFC also runs a finance product endorsed by the Welsh Government. We are in early discussions with the European Investment Bank around the potential for it to be involved in the second phase now of the Housing Finance Grant.
Susie Davis.
Minister, Swansea has over 1,000 empty properties, but last year only 13 of these were targeted to be converted into affordable homes. With the budgetary pressures and possibly mergers looming as well, can you tell us what the government is doing to assist the speeding up of the conversion of empty houses into affordable homes?
Well, this of course is an initiative that we put in place as a government. It is still in its relatively early days. Nevertheless, we're pleased with the progress made so far, and we do recognise how important it is to make sure that empty buildings are put to use for people rather than sit there untenanted and unoccupied for many years.
Roger Glyn Thomas.
Prif Weinidog, yn sicr fe fydde trafod gyda Banc Buddsoddi Ewrop a posibilrwydd o gael cynllun eang yn enwedig yn ardaloedd hynny sydd yn derbyn cymorth gan gronfeydd Ewropeaidd yn rhywbeth gwerth i wneud. Ond y gyd-destun y cwestiwn o dau gwag yn cael ei dychwelyd i'r farchnad ag hefyd awdurdodau sydd am adeiladu tai i'w rhenti. I chi'n cynnig grantiau i cymdeithasau tai. I chi'n ystyried cynnig grantiau i gynghorau lleol fel Sir Gyfyrddin sy'n awyddus i adeiladu tai i'w rhenti?
Wrth gwrs, mae sefyllfa yn wahanol ynglyn â'r gyfraith os gofiau rhwng y ddau, ond ni'n digon hybus wrth gwrs i hybu awdurdodau lleol le maen nhw eisiau i adeiladu tai newydd cyhoeddus. Ni'n gwybod wrth gwrs bod Cyngor Sir Gawr wedi wneud hwn a eisiau sicrhau bod yn digwydd yn y dyfodol, a felly ni'n awyddus i weithio gyda nhw i sicrhau bod yr un manteision ar gael i nhw hefyd.
Peter Black.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, although there is signs that the house prices have started to pick up in Wales, there is evidence that developers are struggling to meet their Section 106 agreement obligations in relation to the provision of affordable homes, and some developers going back to local councils saying that they're not able to generate enough profits and asking councils to release them from those obligations. Can I ask that, therefore, that your government reviews the Section 106 provisions in terms of that side of your affordable homes policy to see whether local authorities can be reinforced in their demand to have more affordable homes built under this particular mechanism?
If there are examples of that happening, I'd be more than happy for the member to write with those examples. We have to be careful, of course, in the sense that quite often Section 106 obligations, if they are not met, the cost of them then has to be met from the public purse, particularly with regard to sometimes with the road adoption, more generally, of course, with community facilities, particularly with the larger developments, things such as schools, as the member will be well aware. Bearing that in mind, of course, if he provides us with examples, I'm sure we'll be able to look at what might be done in order to secure the flow of affordable housing continues.
Question 6, Mohammed Ashgar.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. What action will the Welsh Government take to promote children's rights in Wales in the next 12 months, please?
Well, we'll continue to lead the way in promoting the rights of children and young people. How we do that is clearly set out in the Children's Rights Scheme.
Thank you, First Minister. A key international standard in relation to national human rights institutions for children is their independence from government. Concern have been expressed that Children's Commissioner's independence is potentially undermined because the office is funded through a Welsh Government minister rather than directly by the National Assembly. Will the First Minister commit to looking at the way the Children's Commissioner's office is funded to ensure Wales is in compliance with international human rights standards?
Well, the difficulty with that argument, of course, is that if that were to happen, then the Commissioner would not be independent of the Assembly. And so there's no easy way of resolving this. The view that we take as a government is that it's important that in the appointments process that members are involved from all parties in this chamber, that much is happening. And secondly, when that person is appointed, that they are independent. And I would argue that not just the Children's Commissioner, but all our commissioners have been very robust in terms of criticising government when that is required, and they've certainly never had any negative comeback from ourselves. So I think the system does work. I think the independence is there, and the fact that we have reports that challenge government from time to time shows that the system is robust.
Bethan Jenkins.
Prif Weinidog, yr wythnos yma, dwedodd y Comisiynwyr Plant ar gyfer Lloegr fod toriadau yn gywilyddus yr hyn sydd yn cael ei tori o ran y system lles ac yn y blaen, i'r fath raddau y bod nhw'n mynd i dorri y confensiwn ar yr UNCRC. Ydych chi wedi siarad gyda'r Comisiynydd yma yng Nghymru ynglyn â y ffaith y gallai fod hyn yn cael yr un effaith yng Nghymru, a sut wedyn fyddech chi'n symud ymlaen os bod y Prydain yn mynd i dorri y UNCRC?
Dwi wedi siarad yn bersonol dy'r Comisiwn ynglyn â hwn, ond mi'n gwybod bod yna waith yn cael ei wneud gyda'r Comisiwn ar hyn o bryd, mwyn sicrhau bod fersiwn newydd o erthyglau'r UNCRC yn cael ei gyflwyno, neu ail gyflwyno yma yng Nghymru. A wy'n siŵr bydde hwn yn, byddwn ni'n gobeithio, wel, na wy'n siŵr bod hwn yn rhan o'r trafodaethau sydd yn cymryd lle.
Question 7, Rhys Iorwerth.
Diolch Llywydd, a wneith y Prif Weinidog ddatganiad am ddichonoldeb ail-agor yr rheilffordd o Geirwen i Amlwch.
Wel, mae seilwaith rheilffyrdd yn gyfrifoldeb i Lywodraeth y Deyrnas Unedig wrth gwrs, ond fe gyhoeddodd Network Rail adroddiad ar ymarferoldeb ail-agor y rheilffordd hon yn 2010.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, a dwi'n gwerthfawrogi'n sicr y cyfyngiadau ariannol presennol hynny mi fyswn ni'n gwerthfawrogi cefnogaeth y Prif Weinidog i'r egwyddor o geisio ail-agor y lein yn yr hir dymor, ond mae yna wrth gwrs gama y gallwn ni cymryd i agor mwyafrif y lein yn y byr dymor. A wneith y Prif Weinidog felly roi gefnogaeth i'r ymdrechion i ail-agor rheilffordd dreftadaeth o langefni tu ar gogledd ac ymchwilio i unrhyw ffordd y gall y Llywodraeth helpu symud ymlaen efo hynny cyn gyntaf a phosib yn cynnwys ceisio dylanwadu ar Network Rail i ganiatáu i hynny ddigwydd.
Wel, mi'n deall o'r adroddiad bydd yn costi tua 25.1 miliwn i ail-agor y rheilffordd. Nid i Amlwch, ond o gyffordd Gaerwen i Langefni. Mae yna sawl rwystriad ymarferol ynglyn â wneud hynny, ond wy'n deall bod yna gwmni yn edrych ar wneud hwn ar hyn o bryd, ac wrth gwrs mae hwnna'n rhywbeth ddiddorol dros pen i weld bod yna ddiddordeb gyda nhw i wneud hynny. Byddwn ni'n gobeithio felly bydde Network Rail yn gweithio'n agos gyda nhw mwyn sicrhau os mae'r cynllun busnes yn gweithio bod y prosiect yn cael ei symud ymlaen.
Mark Isherwood.
Thank you. Yes, as you indicate, that 2010 report on that 4.5 mile stretch indicated a 25.1 million cost. I think our colleague from Anglesey raises an interesting point about the heritage railway option, and the precedents have been established in Llangollen with a link to Corwen, not only as a heritage connection but also as an economic and social connection for people. Could the Welsh Government consider supporting models such as that, such as Stage 2 in Llangollen, such as the line we're talking about Gaerwen to Llangefni and Anglesey, as a means not only of driving the heritage agenda, but also of wider economic regeneration within the areas?
Yes, I think what's changed over the years is that heritage railways until one time were seen as tourist railways. And as nothing else. I think that's changed. I mean, the West Somerset Railway was the first to do this, run services through the winter, and act, that's a 20-mile long line anyway, and act as a line for local people at the same time. I think some railway companies even have price differentials in terms of the fare structure for commuters and for tourists. And I think there is a lot of mileage that can be made, forgive the pun, in terms of doing that. For example, a reopening between Llangefni, I mean, the trains would have to run through, of course, I suspect at least at Llandudno Junction, or at least at Bangor, to make the service viable. I think there is potential for looking at a railway, not just in terms of its tourist potential, but also in terms of the links that can be created between communities. So that is something certainly that we'd be keen to investigate and work with any potential company in terms of being able to deliver that.
Question 8, Alan Fred Jones.
Diolch. A wnaeth Gweinidog ddatganiad am y cynnydd yng nghynhyrchiant ynni adnewyddadwy yng Nghymru.
Wel, mae ynni Cymru, sef newid i economi carbon isel, yn amlinellu'r camau i'n cymryd i annog prosiectau ynni adnewyddadwy a gwneud y gorau posibl o'r manteision economaidd ac ymgylcheddol Cymru. Mae rhaid ni gofio wrth gwrs bod y pwerau ddim gyda ni, fel sydd y pawb arall yn y Deyrnas Unedig, i sicrhau bod adnoddau Cymru yn dod o dan reolaeth bobl Cymru.
Diolch. Wrthos dwytha fe, ddaru ni groesawu i'r cynulliad gynllun ynni heidro a nafon o Abergwyn Gregin, sy'n enw hyfryd iawn gyda llaw, yn fe tholaeth i. A mi fydd yn weithredol y flwyddyn nesaf, gobeithio, ond dim ond yr ail gynllun gweithredol fydd hwn sydd wedi cael cymorth o gynllun ynni'r fro. Ac fe fynegodd aelodau o'r cynllun gymunedol yma i'r rhwystredigaeth ynglyn â'r drefn sydd yn bodoli wrth geisio sefydlu cynlluniau cymunedol fel hwn. Mae Llywodraeth Cymru wedi methu ni cyrraedd ei targed o ran ynni adnewyddadwy, does ganddo chi'n targed bellach wrth gwrs. Pam hynny a beth fyddwch chi'n ei wneud i wella'r sefyllfa?
Dau gwestiwn fyna. Gyntaf, wrth gwrs, mae'n amhosib i gael targedau. Yn un o rhywbeth sydd does dim reolaeth gyda ni drosto. A ni wedi gweud o'r blaen, dwi ddim yn rhywbeth teg, bod reolaeth gyda bobl Lloegr, yr Alban a Gogledd Iwerddon dros i adnoddau nhw mewn ffordd sydd ddim dy Cymru. Ond yn ag i'r fro, sydd yn wrth gwrs rhywbeth sy'n dod o dan reolaeth Llywodraeth Cymru, gael dweud bod yna 100% o gynlluniau wedi cael ei gefnogi gan y raglen hynny, a dyle 16 o'r cynlluniau hynny fod yn barod ac yn creu hynny erbyn diwedd y flwyddyn nesaf.
John Griffiths.
Yes, First Minister, would you agree that tidal lagoons have considerable potential to boost our renewable energy output in Wales, and the Severn offers considerable potential for tidal lagoons, and in my own patch from the mouth of the Eastwoods is a prime example of a further possible tidal lagoon that would help with Wales' performance.
Yes, it would. I mean, as somebody who previously had responsibility for major energy projects, it's difficult to explain how complicated all these things are in terms of electricity, the electricity market, reform, strike prices, the renewables obligation certificates. It's a phenomenally complicated area. The difficulty facing any investor in investing in energy generation is knowing what the price will be. And quite often that's not clear, the strike price as it's called. It's also not helped by the fact that we've seen over the past few months even, but certainly years, changes in DEC's priorities in terms of what they want to see and a sudden change from one form of energy to another. What we need is for DEC to ensure that they have a long-term strategy and stick to it, which they haven't done so far, and also, of course, for any developer to understand what price they will get for the energy that they generate. That often, of course, is the problem in terms of securing the investment.
Ahmed Sandbach.
Well, to go back to Ynni of Rome, Minister, that's been running since 2010. There were supposed to be 22 projects completed by March 2015, and over £3 million worth of public money has gone into this scheme with just one project built, and that project having to be intermittently turned off. So will you be looking at your value for money criteria? It's being turned off, Minister. You look puzzled because NRW have said that it's causing damage to migratory salmon. But given that you've spent £3 million on the scheme and only one is being built, will you undergo a review of it and provide reassurance that public money is being effectively spent?
Well, we always review any scheme, of course, but coming back to the point I made earlier, it is supporting 50 schemes at the moment. 16 will be constructed, and they will be generating renewable energy by the end of next year.
Question 9, Russell George.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the Welsh Government's strategy to promote the organic sector in Wales?
Yes, we were the first country in the UK to offer organic farmers and producers financial support under the new Rural Development Programme. Support is also available to those who wish to convert to organic farming, and there will be further opportunities to improve efficiencies through knowledge transfer and, of course, investment in infrastructure.
Next year, a new application period opens for the EU Agricultural Promotion Fund, which will provide up to 70% match funding to help promote the organic sector. As I understand it, if Wales submits a joint application with another region such as England, the application will be looked at more favourably. If you haven't already done so, will you discuss, or will you instruct your officials to discuss this with the Organic Trade Board in England with the intention to submit a joint application?
It's an interesting idea. The difficulty is, of course, quite often England is a competitor for us when it comes to food produce. We jealously guard the status of Welsh lamb and Welsh beef. We jealously guard the status of Welsh dairy products. And we know that our dairy producers do see a benefit, not just in Wales, in terms of that Welsh label. Of course, we'll work with other organisations where we can see a benefit of the people of Wales, but again, we have to bear in mind that we don't dilute our own brand.
David Ellis-Thomas.
Diolch yn fawr, mae'n esiglo i dda. Byddai'r Prif Weinidog yn ymuno i longyfarch y ffair eiaf. Mae'n dda gen i gael y fraint o wisgo i tai nhw y prawn yma ar ei dasliad o 5 mlynedd yr hugain. Ffair sydd a Chymdeithas Amaethyddol Frenhinol Cymru sydd yn llwyfan nid yn unig i'r 1000 o gynnyrchwyr organig ond i weddill cynnyrch Amaethyddol Cymru. Ac i Lywodraeth Cymru ei hun, a diolch iddo am hynny am y nawdd a roddir i'r Gymdeithas. Ond oes gan y Prif Weinidog neges gref i Amaethwyr Cymru ynglyn â chefnogaeth ei Lywodraeth gyda'r cynllun a'r rhaglen datblygu gwledig, a'r berthynas arbennig yn dilyn yr adroddiad a gyhoeddwyd ddoe, rhwng Llywodraeth a'r diwydiant sydd yn bosib at y dyfodol.
Wel, sawl neges byddwn ni'n credu, y gefnogaeth gyllidol ni'n rhoi yn barod, wrth gwrs, i ffermwyr, y gefnogaeth sydd ar gael i arall gyfeirio sydd yn helpu sio gymaint o ffermwyr i aros yn y byd ffermo a hefyd wneud ambell i beth arall hefyd i ddod â arian mewn. Ag wrth gwrs y ffaith heddi os gofiau bod ni wedi talu 90 o ffermwyr unwaith bod y ffenest wedi agor ynglyn â thaliadau. Mae hwnna rhywbeth wrth gwrs ni wedi wneud am blynyddau nawr a rhywbeth wrth gwrs ni'n falch iawn o'r ffaith bod ni wedi wneud dro hyn hefyd.
Question 10, Christine Chapman.
Thank you. Will the First Minister make a statement on the impact of the economic recession on personal relationships?
Yes, I'm aware of the recent research by Relate, which suggests difficult economic times, of course, can place significant pressure on relationships, and we have a range of initiatives in place to support people during these testing times.
Thank you, First Minister. Well, as you said, Relate Cymru did publish this report called Relationships, Recession and Recovery, and it found that people who suffered the negative impacts of the recession were considerably more likely to have experienced deterioration in the quality and stability of their relationships. And this has been called the social recession. It's not only a concern for the individual, not only a concern for the individuals involved, but has wider social costs, and unaddressed, the impact of this is likely to continue for some time. Would you agree, First Minister, that good quality relationships are important for public health and well-being, and that strong relationships support a stronger economy? And will you also consider the findings of this report in future policy making across all policy areas?
I'd agree, of course, that robust relationships are important for public health and, of course, in terms of supporting a stronger economy. I am aware, of course, as I've mentioned already, of the research published by Relate, and I can assure the member that we will consider this further.
Jonathan Saunders.
Presiding Officer, First Minister, all evidence suggests
that as we approach Christmas and what should be a family, happy, peaceful and spiritual time can often cause a lot of personal relationships to feel strained with various reasons, family tensions, unemployment, economic, financial hardship or even illness. Sadly though, although we do have superb agencies operating all year round, during the Christmas period we do have a 9-to-5 culture. Many of our public services and support agencies see themselves closed down for long periods of time. Relationships, of course, over the Christmas period can break down at any time of day or night. And I just really want some reassurance that as First Minister, you will ensure that those people who do become desperately in support over this time will actually have the support agencies there and accessible so that they are supported.
Many public agencies, of course, do maintain teams that deal with acute situations where they need to, and of course many third sector organisations do work very strongly over Christmas.
Not all.
We will know that for many Christmas is a time of joy, for others it isn't, particularly those who live on their own. It's been a well-documented fact for some time now that there is an increased risk of suicide amongst people who are on their own at Christmas time, very, very sadly. So I would expect those public agencies who need to offer acute services to have teams available where they are required, working of course with those third sector organisations that do provide so much support over the Christmas period.
Thank you, First Minister. We now move to item 2, which is the business statement. And I